Hello, 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 everyone. Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing, and I am excited to talk about this one, partly because it was spawned by something we watched recently. So I'm just going to dive into that, and we're going to take off from there. So let me pull this up for everyone. So recently, as a church, we watched Lord of the Rings. We watched the whole series of Lord of the Rings, and if you haven't seen it, which if you haven't seen it, you should. It's good. It's worth watching at least one time. There's lots of great Christian themes in there, but one of the things that I think is interesting is the two hobbits that are kind of at the center of it, Frodo and Sam, are tasked with bringing the ring to Mordor. And one of the things that basically they start off as okay friends at the beginning, but their friendship grows over the course of the series to be pretty deep, right? And one of the things that I think is important when we are thinking about friendship is how or what friendship means today, and how it often is sublimated or misunderstood. And so, what does the Bible have to say about friendship? That's kind of what I want to talk about. And even today, people struggle to deal with friendship, actually, especially between men, but not exclusively, although the examples I'm going to give are all going to be male. But I am going to show you guys an article that deals with female and female relationships. And why is that? Well, let's first look at like how some people have interpreted this. So Sam and Frodo are friends in the movie. In the book, there's never any hint that there's any sort of romantic or sexual love between them. But this doesn't stop people today from imposing that upon them. So, for instance, this is a essay that I found from the Gay and Lesbian Review, which I imagine is like a magazine or maybe an academic journal. And it's an essay talking about the sex and subtext in Tolkien's world, specifically focusing on what the author claims is a homosexual relationship between Frodo and Sam. And he points out that this is all about how this is friendship, but really what's under the surface is this homosexual love, right? And there, in the article, he tries to point these things out. And what's interesting here, only because I can't get to the whole thing, but this article makes the case that this is also a kind of an unsubtle hint by Tolkien at his relationship with C.S. Lewis, who I'm sure you've heard of. C.S. Lewis is a very famous Christian writer, wrote the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that this is actually kind of a play, why at what's under the surface. And right here, he claims that because religious conservatives have dominated publishing biographies and critical works of Tolkien, their approach toward homosexuality in Tolkien's work and in his life has been complete silence. So he argues in this that Tolkien was subtly homosexual, and that these characters as Sam and Frodo reflect that. And actually, I mean, like, if you watch the movie and you watch it with that lens, or you read the books with that lens on, you can find hints of that. But that, I don't think, is meant to be that way by Tolkien, because Tolkien is approaching a friendship, the concept of friendship, from a very different way than we do, right? We associate affection or any sort of intimacy with sexuality in our culture. And we do this with other people too, other couples as well. So, for instance, this one I've run into so many times because I've studied classics. So there's the Iliad by Homer. I've talked about it on here before. And in the Iliad, there's Achilles, who I'm sure you've heard of, the Achilles heel, right? A great warrior. And he has a second, who's Patroclus. And he and Patroclus have a very close relationship. And Patroclus dies later in the Iliad. And it sends Achilles into grief and rage. And he talks about how he loved Patroclus, and he's going to make the Trojans pay for killing him, which is what he goes on to do. And in this story, right, a lot of people today um, especially, are reading this as a homosexual relationship. And this even happened with some in ancient Greece as well, although I would not say the majority, but there were some voices who said this as well. Not in the sense that we understand it now, to be clear. It was very different for the Greeks. In fact, a whole book came out that was very popular amongst ladies, especially, called The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, this book, which is all about the romantic relationship between Patroclus, supposedly. Again, I don't believe that that's actually true, but the supposedly romantic relationship between Patroclus and Achilles. So you see it there. You also see it in the Bible. So you see it, especially, you'll see people talk about Jonathan and David as being potential lovers. Again, this is a very small minority points, but they'll talk about the when David and Jonathan have to be split up because Saul, who's Jonathan's father, is trying to kill David. They kind of meet alone together, and they say their goodbyes. They weep and they kiss, and then they break apart. Jonathan stays with Saul, and David goes off to do his own thing and fight against Saul. And especially that kiss has been made a lot of because it would have been a kiss on the lips. This is actually a very common thing in culture at that time, and even continues into the New Testament and into many cultures in that area today. For instance, when Judas kisses Jesus to reveal who he is to the troops, he kisses him on the lips. When Paul says greet each other with a holy kiss, he's most likely referring to the practice of kissing each other on the lips. So just an interesting historical and cultural tidbit to show you how cultures are different. But I think it shows the lens with which we view things impacts greatly how we think about stuff. So I also wanted to talk about this article here because this is what got me thinking about friendship. So this is an article from The Atlantic back in 2020, although it popped up on my Facebook a few, I think 1 or 2 months ago, and I was like, oh, this is a good topic. I'll save this. But it says, what if friendship, not marriage, was at the center of life? And it talks about relationships, and as far as I can remember from reading it, only women with women relationships. And so there's a bunch of different things that she gives here, some of which, I mean, I don't agree with what everyone's saying, but I actually am somewhat accepting or somewhat positive towards this notion of detaching fulfillment from romantic relationships, right? Because this is partially why our society is so off kilters, because everyone believes that not everyone, but there's this common cultural belief that in order to be happy, you have to be married, right? Or you have to be sexually fulfilled in some way. And as a Christian, right, that's not the picture that we are given in the Bible. And so I want to talk about this article, but the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the Bible. So I have 3 verses, well, not 3 verses, but 3, well, I don't know, 3 things that I've chosen out. One is just one verse, so that's why it's confusing. But the first one is from Proverbs 27, 9 through 10. And it says, perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of a friend springs from their heartfelt advice. Do not forsake your friend or a friend of your family, and do not go to your relative's house when disaster strikes you. Better a neighbor nearby than a relative far away. So you actually see here in Proverbs, the advice that is being given is, one, that friendship is good, pleasant, that sort of thing, but also friends fill in the role of family, because it's better, as this person says, right, to go to someone who's close to you than to go far away when something bad happens. And friends fill that position, right? And it's very important for me, right? Obviously, my family, immediately family, is far away from me. So there are people that are closer who I'm friendly with or friends with or have a deep relationship with who would be willing to help me out or take me in if something happened. And not that my family wouldn't, but it's just, distance. Ecclesiastes also talks about this. Ecclesiastes is normally a very pessimistic book, and this is a section of it that you'll often hear read at weddings. And the reason you'll hear this read at weddings is because it talks about how two are better than one. But the interesting thing about this is that Ecclesiastes is not talking about marriage. It's talking about just two people together. And honestly, it seems like it's two men together. So like a friend relationship, right? So it says two are better than one because they have good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. And if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So there's this idea, right, that being with someone else, having someone else in a close relationship is positive. And obviously, this does apply to marriage because husbands and wives are friends or should be friends with each other. But it's not a complete point about, oh, this is why you should get married, right? And even though it's read at a lot of weddings and things like that. Lastly, John 15:15, and this is how Jesus refers to others, and I think this is important. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. And that's actually where the title of this book right here, which is called But I Have Called You Friends, Reflections on the Art of Christian Friendship by Mother Mary Frances, is. And this is actually a really good book on friendship, especially among Christians, because she wrote it, as she's a nun, if you can't tell by the name, and she wrote it to other nuns who were in community about how to get along with each other, basically. And I think that that's actually pretty important because there, right, the basis of relationship in that community is only friendship, right? Because when you're a nun or a monk or other things, you take a vow of celibacy. And so you're never going to be pushed into a category where you find primary happiness or your primary relationship fulfillment from a marriage thing. Not that that's wrong, right? Again, husbands and wives can be friends, but I think what's interesting in society is we want to push it towards marriage and sexuality as being the ultimate fulfillment of this desire, and that other ones are like friendship is just in some cases just latent homosexuality, right? Some people will say that, or just never going to be as deep or as rich or as fulfilling as a marriage. And again, this is why it's important to remember that I don't have this Bible verse up, but one of the important things to remember is that we're not married in heaven, right? Marriage ends on earth. So it's really important to remember that the way that we will relate to each other primarily forever is, as Jesus says here, as friends. And I think that that is something worth talking about. So this article, I was really, because of all that, right? I know the biblical teaching on friendship. I know that marriage is not the be-all, end-all. I know that sexuality fulfillment is not the be-all, end-all. So I saw this article and I went, wow, this is really good. I'm glad to see a secular voice talking about this. And it's pretty good. I still think this article puts way too much focus on the self, and that it's about, personal fulfillment when really our nature as humans should be to sacrifice. And also there is a little bit of failure to launch when it comes to prioritizing. So for instance, it talks about these two women, Tillotson and West, and she had this girl named West or whatever has a boyfriend, and she said to him about her friend, I need you to know that she's not going anywhere. She's my number one. And then she says, she will be there after you. And if you think at any point that this isn't going to be my number one, you're wrong. Now, I would say that actually in a dating relationship, like a boyfriend, this is extremely appropriate. In a marriage, this has to change by nature of being married, right? Your spouse has to become your number one because you are in a sacrificial love relationship with them. Now, boyfriend, girlfriend, this is fine. But this idea of, she will be there after you, I mean, maybe not, right? What if she dies? So it's important just to do that. And it talks about how someone in the past did not relate well to her. And she says, our boyfriends, our significant others, our husbands are supposed to be number one. our worlds are backwards. I don't think that that's true, especially again with husbands. It depends here about things going on. But one of the interesting things here is, so it goes on to talk about how these friend groups are buying um, uh, are buying houses together, living together, raising each other's children, using joint credit cards, all of which you can do, right? If you're a friend, you actually don't need to be married for a lot of these things. And she says here, right, these friendships have many of the trappings of romantic relationships, minus the sex. I mean, probably other romantic gestures as well. I doubt that they're kissing each other and stuff like that. um, in our way of thinking about it, at least. And so, anyway, she goes on and on and on. Why don't I talk about this? So she gives a history about how this was viewed in the past and things like that. But I really found this interesting. She says, intimate friendships have not always generated confusion and judgment. The period spanning the 18th to the early 20th century was the heyday of passionate, devoted same-sex friendships called romantic friendships. Without self-consciousness, American and European women addressed effusive letters to my love or my queen. Women circulated friendship albums and filled their pages with affectionate verse. And so she gives examples of that. I actually completely disagree with the timing of this. I actually think this was the last hurrah of this type of thinking. Early 20th centuries lines up perfect when Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, right? The 1920s, 30s, and 40s. I actually think that is the end of a way of life that was really practiced for a very long time of human history, which is that you would primarily find your emotional attachment with people of your same sex just based on the way that you were living. Now, I can't speak universally for this. I really can only speak for the European context because I've studied medieval history here. And classical history. And most of that is sex segregated history in that men do these things and women do these things. And so the time that you are spending with other people of your same sex is very high, and the time of period spent between others is very low. For instance, in ancient Athens, women had their own section of the house where they would be, and men would be in their section of the house. So you often see parties held like in movies about ancient Greece or whatever, and men and women will be in the same room. But that actually, I mean, I'm not going to say it never happened, but at least in Athens, which is the place that we have the most knowledge about, and probably in many other Greek city-states outside of Sparta, women generally were doing their own thing while the men were doing their thing. And you really have a high standard of for male friendship, especially in ancient Greece, which is seen as the most pure form of relationship, because they did not, Greek philosophers did not view women very highly. And so the concept of soulmates, which I'm sure all of you have heard of in a romantic concept, actually first existed in Plato and had to do men with men. That was the entire point of it. It's only later over time that we took it and developed it. I think very recently. I don't know the history, but I would imagine only in the last 100 years or so have we developed it to mean men and women. When in reality, it was like men in friendship or even men in sexual relationship in some cases. Whatever the case is, right? I think that this is the end of what's going on, right? Because we actually see in previous centuries, previous millennia, that these close relationships are normal, right? And talked about, and even held up as standards of how you should act towards each other. So what does this mean for Christians? Well, I think, like, what can Christians contribute to the conversation? Well, I think Christians can contribute in basically two ways. The first way is to affirm, and this might be hard for some of us, but we have to affirm that romantic and sexual relationships are not the be-all, end-all of the human heart, especially because we may want these for our children, we may want these for our friends, we may want these for all other sorts of reasons, right? But we have to understand that someone can be completely and utterly fulfilled without that. you don't need to be married. It's like that needs to be very clear, right? Jesus was not married. Paul may have been, but was certainly not married by the time that he was doing his work as an apostle, right? Because he tells people to be single like he is. Like we are ultimately friends with Christ, and then friends with each other, and that is where we pull or should pull our relationship. Uh, pull out significance from those relationships. That's what we should be trying to do. On the other side, so that's number one, right? And we should affirm that. If people want to get married, if we shouldn't, if a guy and a girl like each other, whatever, right? Who cares? That's fine. But the idea here is that is not the ideal. What the ideal is relationship with Christ as first and foremost, and then however someone decides to live that out on earth, whether it's getting married or not, doesn't matter. Uh, in fact, Paul would say it's better that they don't. What I'll say as a second to that, so that's the first point. The second point is cultivate these types of relationships in our own lives and show people that we can detach deep, meaningful relationships from sexuality. Because the more that we just hand things over to sexuality and romance, the harder it is to actually live this out. Because then you end up having deep friendships with people, and it's viewed as weird or degenerate or as something that it's not by people on the outside. And or those and assumptions will be made, like we are doing now with movie characters and people that lived thousands of years ago, right? So we can't really escape it if we continue to say that sex and sexuality and marriage and romance is the heart of every person, and not this just deep longing to be in relationship with others, which reflects our deep longing to be in relationship with God. So Jesus defines us as friends, and I think we should take that and we should love that definition of ourselves, and we should want to bring that close friendship and depth to all of our relationships with other people. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys found that interesting. I will see you guys on Sunday for worship, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Peace out.